It was Europe's worst refugee crisis since World War II. In 2015 alone, more than 1 million refugees crossed these waters from Turkey to Greece. Europe said it couldn't cope, and Turkey, already hosting millions of refugees, wanted solidarity. The solution? A landmark agreement between Turkey and the European Union to stem the flow and save lives. Under the one-for-one deal, the EU would resettle one Syrian asylum seeker living in Turkey to Europe. In exchange, a Syrian refugee crossing illegally into Greece would be returned to Turkey. The EU also promised visa-free travel to Europe for 79 million Turkish citizens, more than 3 billion euros in aid, and to accelerate talks on Turkey's membership to the EU. But just 8 months later, political tensions are threatening the deal.
Because the EU hasn't kept its promises, we don't see any reason why we should continue sticking to this refugee deal.
We will never negotiate under threats.
Europe is heading towards being drowned in its own fears. Turkophobia is mounting.
They are completely detached from reality.
The European Parliament has frozen talks over Turkey's EU membership and hasn't yet granted visa-free travel for Turkish nationals.
EU and Turkey got themselves into a trap by agreeing on the 72 conditions of the visa roadmap, some of which Turkey says it will not fulfill, like changing the anti-terror law, which has led the EU to say, well, then it can't give visa liberalization. I think that's a mistake. One could find a way out of this, but of course for this there need to be discussions and contacts and talks.
One year on, Brussels has hailed the deal's success in reducing the number of arrivals. But tens of thousands of refugees remain trapped in asylum centers in Greece, waiting to be processed.
Everything is difficult we have here in Greece. That's just we are asking for Europeans to open the border to get the full right and to get the asylum exactly as the right for the refugees.
On Lesbos Island, patience is wearing thin.
Their increasing vulnerability on a daily basis is causing a state of severe distress. People are being pushed into violence, drugs, and alcohol use.
These victims of war have now become victims of a political fallout, and their road ahead is now as uncertain as the fate of the deal forged to protect them. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Okay, to discuss the deal, I'm joined in the studio by Emre Gönen. He's a senior lecturer of European Studies at Bilgi University here in Istanbul and an expert in Turkey-EU relations. And in London, Monica Costa-Riba. She's a migrant rights campaigner at Amnesty International. And for the view from within the EU's capital, Peter Klepper. He's the head of the Brussels office of independent policy think tank Open Europe. We also approached the European Commission for comment, but they declined to come on the show, just for your information. Okay, thanks all of you for joining us. Let me start with you, Monica. 1 year on, has it been a good deal?
For us, it hasn't been a good deal. I mean, we are calling this deal a blueprint for despair. And I think it's pretty obvious when you look at all the images that, that are being shown around the world about the conditions in which thousands of refugees and migrants are stranded in Greece as a result of this deal. So people are languishing in camps without the basics, but also with the uncertainty over the future, without knowing whether they're going to be returned to Turkey, a country that is not safe for the refugees.
Emre Gönen, a blueprint for despair, according to Amnesty. Do you agree with that?
A blueprint for despair, maybe not, because obviously the people smuggling over the frontiers has ceased, and the step forward has not been taken, which is the integration of these people in the places they remain, especially Turkey. And that shows the very, how would I say, transitional aspect of the future of these people, and this is making anxious everybody elsewhere. But it depends very much on the end result. The smuggling of these people, the deaths, the mass attempts to cross the borders have ceased. It's only a first step of the solution, obviously, but already this is important. To go further in establishing a much deeper cooperation between EU and Turkey, we have other kinds of obstacles. But I believe that it's much better than not having done anything up until now.
Okay, Peter Klepper, the European Commission issued a report saying irregular arrivals are down 97%. They're also saying people are not dying with the frequency, and we don't have the numbers that we had in 2015, for example, and the early months of 2016. So they're saying it's a success. And then on the other hand, you have MSF come out with a report saying these are alternative facts and it's not true and people are suffering. Who's right and who's wrong?
Well, I'm sorry, if you look at official figures of the number of people that have died at sea, this has fallen to near zero since March 2016. So the facts are undeniable. If you compare with the central Mediterranean route between Libya and Italy, there are many people, I think 4,000 or 5,000 have died last year. So wherever you stand in this debate, I think we should agree that the chaos could not have been allowed to continue. Now, the question is the Turkey-EU deal responsible for this? Only partly, I think. There were only maximum 1,000 people sent back from Greece to Turkey.
Monica, what the other two gentlemen are saying basically is that, okay, it's an imperfect deal, but it's a good deal insofar as people are not dying at these massive rates, and we don't have that crisis that we had. Yes, these refugees and migrants don't have a good time of it in these camps, in places like Greece, in places like Serbia. That can be improved upon, but you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Are you willing to concede that?
I mean, the thing is that, of course, it's undeniable that there's less people that are dying because obviously Turkey has actually managed to protect that border. But the thing is, it's not just about that. I mean, it's about solidarity in Europe. It's about the number of people that is in need of protection. And this hasn't changed. So it's the same number of people like fleeing from Syria, fleeing from Iraq, and fleeing from other places where they need protection. And this has actually not decreased. And what it happens, and we've seen in other circumstances, is that because people need to flee, they will find other ways, the smugglers will find other ways to manage for these people to reach Europe in a much more dangerous way. And that's what is happening, and that's what can happen. So it's not a success at all in that sense. And also that we've actually meet people that they can't really bear the conditions in Greece, and they are voluntarily returning to Turkey, knowing that their situation there, it won't be good either. So because, I mean, in Turkey, people do not have like full refugees status if they are not a European. So, which means that they're going to have a really, really tough time as well, and they're going to feel insecure as well.
Right. Peter, let me ask you about what Gerald Knaus said. He's Austrian, he's the architect of the deal. So it's not just the aid agencies that are saying this is a problem. He's the author of the refugee deal, and he said, and I quote him, "The procedures are too slow, there's no resources, it's an absurd situation. We are detaining people in catastrophic conditions." So it's not just the aid agencies like MSF or Amnesty or the Norwegian Refugee Council. The author of the deal saying, we've messed this up. So what do you think needs to be done to fix it?
Well, I do agree with the criticism that the conditions in the facilities for refugees in Greece are definitely not good, and they should be improved. So I definitely agree with that. But more fundamentally, I find it very strange that people insist that all these migrants need to come to Europe. First of all, there's no democratic support for that in Europe. All kinds of very dangerous, crazy populists are being empowered as a result of this policy. So, and it's just much cheaper. Any calculation will show it's much cheaper to help people in the areas closer to where they come from. And I think I just find it strange that this kind of policy is not preferred. We could help a lot more people if we sort of make sure they can be welcomed at refugee camps, sort of close to the war zones in safe conditions. That's much cheaper. You can help a lot more people.
So let's ask Monica about that. So Monica, closer to the war zones, in places like Turkey and other countries that border Syria, for example, Peter's saying have refugee camps there, and by imposing refugees on countries in Europe, you're playing into the right-wing populist sentiment, which makes things worse. Monica?
I mean, there are already 3 million refugees in Turkey, and we understand that, I mean, Europe can actually and has actually to support the efforts of Turkey to make sure that these people can live in dignity there. But when we are talking about a crisis of people coming to Europe, I mean, Europe has 80 million people. We're talking now at the moment in Greece, trapped in Greece, 60,000 people. So 60,000 people that Europe is not able to welcome. I think the numbers don't match. We are not talking about European refugee crisis. We are talking about here of a solidarity crisis in Europe, because we are talking about 15,000 people in the Greek islands that could easily be moved to the mainland, and then for them to have access to relocation or family reunification or other ways to move onwards in Europe, and another 45,000 people that easily could be moving to different parts of Europe. We are not talking about big numbers.
Okay, and I see Peter shaking his head in disagreement. Peter, I can't come to you because I want to broaden this out and talk about the politics and talk about the possibility of this collapsing and bring in Emre Gönen here. So, Emre, we speak of solidarity. The Turks feel that the Europeans haven't shown too much solidarity. There's talk of the deal collapsing. We've heard from Minister Ömer Çelik, we've heard from others saying we might just tear up the deal. How likely is that Turkey's going to walk away from the deal?
I am not very confident that it will go beyond words, because at that juncture, Turkey needs badly the support of the European Union countries in order to integrate this community of refugees within Turkey. They are numbering more than 3 million people, and virtually all of them would like to stay in Turkey rather than going back to what is left of their countries.
Okay, so there's that, right? And there's money needed and so on and so forth.
But it's not just money.
Visa liberalization and all those other parts of the deal, Turkey saying you didn't
visa liberalization has been granted to Georgia. Turkey should have had it 10
exactly.
years,
That's why I'm asking, is Turkey going to walk away now because they feel the Europeans haven't played fair?
This is the worst step to be taken either by the EU or Turkey on this field. Let's talk realpolitik. The European Union, if only 1% of the refugees are in Turkey, would like to cross illegally the frontiers, whether the Balkan route is difficult or not. If a refugee wants to cross a border, he or she does it to the risk of his or her life. If only 1% of the refugees would move to the frontier, it's 30,000 people already. With 60,000 people, you have a major problem in Greece already.
But has it been helpful that, for example, Interior Minister Suleyman Soylu has been threatening to blow the mind of Europeans with 15,000 refugees and so on? Is that helping the atmosphere?
It is not helping the atmosphere at all, but as you see, the atmosphere is almost poisoned between Turkey and the EU. I do not know how many times the president has been threatened as a dictator, and then he lost his temper, so the word Nazi has been flying up. So it is perhaps the worst time regarding the relationship and the rhetoric between EU and Turkey. But this should not hinder the fact that on the refugee crisis, but more than the humanitarian issue, the integration issue, the probable solution to be implemented in Syria, the EU, especially Germany and France and Turkey, do need each other more than ever. But there is also a deep mistrust in between Turkey and the EU for very valid reasons. Most of the promises of the EU have not been granted. The visa-free circulation is only a welcoming gift for countries starting accession negotiations. Even this has made a very huge issue by the European Union. On the other hand, the fact that Turkish responsibles do use very inflammatory rhetoric is not helping the whole question to be wrapped up. That's a whole issue. We should perhaps focus on the big picture rather than picking up this or that from the daily declarations of the responsibles in the EU and Turkey.
Yeah, we don't know which words to take seriously. That's the problem, right? We don't know what's rhetoric and what's serious. Monica, I know you've been critical of the deal, but if Turkey and the Europeans decide to tear up their agreement, do you think it will make things worse?
I mean, it depends. I mean, in our point of view, it's not just the deal. Whether or not the deal collapses, it's not going to make that difference with refugees if we don't have like a real deal. What we understand by a real deal is, for instance, like a resettlement program that would work from Turkey. So what we don't want is like thousands of people risking their lives in the sea again, of course, because, you know, as we know and as we've seen, they've been risking their lives. But we want is a plan that actually works. And a plan that works means a plan that actually works from Turkey. So in one side, yes, integration, but on the other side, a resettlement program that allows for like a number of refugees, people that are in need of protection to be able to go to Europe in a safely manner.
Emre?
Yeah, it is perhaps not that easy to settle a community of 3 million people who are in Turkey out of despair in a foreseeable time. I mean, it's very nice to talk about implementing plans, but who has been implementing such a plan in Europe to begin with? Turkey is having the responsibility of all these people. We are not talking a lot at all about sending them away back to Syria. It is not possible. Turkey has sent its army to fight against the Syrian problem. This is the only NATO army with boots on the ground. Now, it's very interesting to say, well, Turkey should have implemented all this, but how do we do it? With 60,000 refugees, it's a big crisis in Europe. With 3 million refugees, Turkey is threatened by not doing enough. I find that it's a little bit unjust and biased analysis of the situation.
Okay, unfortunately, Monica, I'd love to get you in for some more Peter, but we are out of time. I'm really sorry. It's the worst part of my job when I have to wrap when things are extremely interesting. Emre Gönen, Monica Costa-Riba, and Peter Klepper, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.